we heard them report actually some months back that sort of rethinking their production capacity and paring that back in response to the way electric vehicle demand and battery supply was shaking out, that was going to set them back more than $1 billion. So this is an incremental amount of money on top of that. And there was some warning in the 8K last night that actually, there may be more to come. So, I think this is part of a broader sort of rationalization taking place in the U.S. where, an industry was trying to respond to an administration that was, banging the drum in a much different way than the Trump administration is now.
I look at this trailing 12-month performance of General Motors. It's up 61%. And that kind of tells me, and you can take as many charges as you want here. I want you to pare back your transitions to EV. Is that kind of what you're hearing?
It's fascinating because on one hand, you're seeing, electric car leader, or at least former electric car leader Tesla, taking off and doing so in spite of the fact that their sales are slowing down. Yep. The outlook for EVs in their home market is pretty bleak. And yet you also in unison have, sort of the contrarian play taking off in GM. I think, it's maybe not quite that simple in that, GM does have, I think David Welch's story on last night's news does have, sort of the context that they have quite a lot of electric vehicles available. They're going to continue to have a pretty broad, range of cars. And Mary Barra has talked about how EVs is their, quote, North Star, and that's not going to change. So I think there's going to be a little bit more stick-to-itiveness on GM's part than Ford. And yet, I think this is also an indication that the market is saying, you know what, the way this company makes money is it's full-size pickups and SUVs. The more of those that they can make in this, new paradigm, the merrier.
So I guess give us a sense of, in the U.S., I think we have an idea that this transition to EVs is going to take longer than maybe we initially thought. That's not the case, it seems like, in Europe. Tell us how the adoption is going in Europe.
Yeah, I think actually last year it may be surprising to people because we ended the year with these headlines about the EU sort of backing off of its combustion engine ban for 2035. That being said, we actually had a nice pickup in momentum for electric vehicles last year. A lot of that was driven by the Chinese manufacturers. I think that is part of where the concern is here, that the local manufacturers in Europe, some of them are doing better than they were, but it is patchy. I think it's also patchy, sort of country by country. But we did see, a roughly 30% increase in battery electric vehicle sales last year, in spite of the fact that a big player in Tesla had a really tough 2025.
That's interesting. Talk to us about hybrids here. I just caved and leased a hybrid for my number 4 offspring because he goes to school in California where the gas prices are just ridiculously high. The technology seemed really cool to me. The car drove great. And it seems like a nice mix between, or a nice compromise between going full EV and full ICE. How do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, this was the supposed bridge technology, and the bridge is going for a lot longer than I think a lot of people reckoned. I remember, covering Toyota, being based in Japan for a few years, Toyota taking a lot of heat for sort of clinging to, this technology that it sort of pioneered with the Prius, and, not sort of jumping with both feet in fully electric vehicles. That has very much turned out to be the play. And I think we're seeing, a lot of the excess battery capacity that got built in response to the Biden administration's push for, more of a battery, sector to be built in the U.S. A lot of that is going to get soaked up by these hybrids, whether they're plug-in vehicles or not. If you can make, the bigger pickups and SUVs that are already popular in the U.S. more efficient, you get sort of the best of both worlds. Even if there's a little bit of incremental cost on the front end, these vehicles are going to be much cheaper to refuel and better to run.